All right, here we go into chapter 10. And the title of chapter 10 is The Reading. Corrie looked up from the Gospel of Mark she was reading. Had someone stopped outside her cell door, or was it just her imagination? She had been alone in the cell for 6 weeks now, with nothing to keep her company except a troop of ants and the silent daily visit of a trustee to deliver food and empty her toilet bucket. When a key clicked in the lock, she knew she hadn't been imagining. She quickly slipped the Gospel of Mark under the mattress. A moment later, a tall, thin guard stepped into the room. Corrie didn't recognize her as one of the usual guards. Ten Boom, follow me, she ordered in a gruff voice. Gruff, vocabulary word. Rough, harsh, stern manner of speech, a lot like Mrs. Corbett. Corrie climbed from the cot and reached for her coat. No, don't bother with that, said the guard. Hurry up. As Corrie scurried down the corridor after the guard, she wondered where they were taking her this time. Couldn't be back to the hospital in Scheveningen. She would need her hat and coat to leave the prison, and besides, she was feeling much better now. The guard wound her way down several corridors, leading Corrie through areas of the prison she had never seen before. Every so often, Corrie heard a person talking or sobbing behind a cell door and wished she were able to stop and have a real conversation with another human being. But she kept on walking, and to her surprise she was led outside after all. A blast of cold air wrapped itself around her as she stood in a small courtyard with 4 wooden huts crowded into it. All of the huts were painted gray and looked dull, like everything else in the prison. Except for the hut on the far side of the courtyard. It was different. Around its dull gray exterior was planted a row of yellow tulips. The tulips were past their prime, and the petals on many of the flowers were beginning to fall off. But that made no difference to Corrie. They were real flowers. And even if they were wilting, they were still the most beautiful things she had seen in a long time. Much to her delight, Corrie got to walk right past the tulips as the guard led her to the hut and motioned her to go in. Shut the door, please, Miss Ten Boom, a soft voice ordered from the far end of the hut. Corrie did as she was told and then turned to see who it was that had spoken. It was a medium-built man with sandy brown hair and dressed in full Nazi uniform, complete with a row of ribbons and medals. Much to Corrie's surprise, the man was smiling at her. My name is Lieutenant Rams, he said courteously, removing his hat. Please sit down. He motioned for Corrie to sit in the armchair beside the wood stove. Thank you, mumbled Corrie, unused to being treated with kindness. You look a little cold, and I've read in your files that you have not been well. Before we begin our conversation, let me put a few more logs on the fire. The lieutenant reached into the woodpile. Corrie felt the warm glow of the fire on her as he opened the door of the stove and pushed 3 pieces of wood into it. How wonderful it felt, and so did the armchair, which had a padded back and thick cushions. Corrie felt as though she were in a dream. Then suddenly she came to her senses. There was a reason the lieutenant was treating her this way. She had been warned about this before she ever got to prison. Some of the Nazi interrogators tried to get information out of the members of the underground by torturing them, but other interrogators used kindness to lull the prisoners into thinking they had a friend in the Gestapo. Now, interrogator, vocabulary word, one who questions a person formally and systematically. There and then, Corrie promised herself she would keep her guard up. Too many lives depended on her keeping quiet about the things she knew. Lieutenant Rams finished stoking the fire and sat down in a chair opposite Corrie. Stoking, vocabulary word, to supply fuel to a fire. Now, let me see, he said. There are a few matters we need to clear up. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer as best you can. Corrie nodded, amazed at the near-perfect Dutch he spoke with only the slightest hint of a German accent. The lieutenant reached in his breast pocket and casually pulled out a brown leather notebook. He flipped it open as he chatted. Miss Ten Boom, he began, as you know, Many mistakes are made during unfortunate times like these. I don't believe you should be in prison, and I want to help you find a way to get out of here. Would you like that?" Corrie nodded. Who wouldn't like that? But he continued in a soothing voice. "I can help you only if you tell me the whole truth. If you tell me everything you know, I'll see what I can do for you." "How would that be?" he asked, smiling. Corrie smiled weakly back at him, trying to appear calmer than she really was. "Good," replied the lieutenant. "Now, I'm going to read you a list of names, and I want you to tell me which of them you recognize." Corrie nodded. Excuse me. "Joel Cullen." He paused, looking at Corrie, and then went on. "Hans Fredericks." The list went on and on. Corrie relaxed and sank back into the warm embrace of the armchair as she listened. She had nothing to hide from the lieutenant. She really didn't recognize a single name on the list. She supposed the names were all members of the underground, but everyone she knew in the underground was called, do you remember? Remember their name? That's right, Smith. Corrie had no idea of their real names, so there was absolutely nothing she could tell him about the names in his little book. When the lieutenant had finished reading all the names, he looked at Corrie. "Are you sure you don't recognize even one of these names? It would be a great help to me, and it would help you too," he said softly. Corrie shook her head. "I don't know any of them," she said. For the next hour, Lieutenant Roms asked her all sorts of questions about the underground. Corrie had the impression he thought she was deeply involved in the business of getting extra ration cards, either by organizing raids on food offices or by using forged papers. Of all the things the underground did, this was the one area Corrie knew the least about what went on. She had only distributed the extra ration cards other members of the underground had obtained. So again, it was easy for her to say nothing about how the underground got their extra ration cards. There was little she could have told him, even if she'd wanted to. Finally, Lieutenant Roms stopped asking specific questions and looked Corrie in the eyes. "I can see you are an honest woman," he said. "Why don't I sit here and you tell me about the things you were involved in before you came to the prison?" Corrie eagerly sat up straight in the armchair. Now she had something to talk about. "Well, Lieutenant," she began, "my family and I have always been involved in telling others about Jesus Christ. Only the week before I was arrested, I visited one of the girls I'd worked with for many years. She's mentally retarded, but I'm sure she understands that God loves her." "What a stupid waste of time!" exclaimed the lieutenant. "Why would God love someone who is defective? What good is a religion that accepts half-wits into its midst?" Half-wits, vocabulary word, a foolish or imbecile person. Do you remember Captain John Winter calling himself an imbecile in Banner in the Sky? "The Third Reich accepts only those among us who are worthy specimens." Corrie smiled. "I'd like to tell you the truth, if I may, Lieutenant," she announced to him. The officer leaned forward in his chair. "Of course, go right ahead," he said, picking up a pencil. Corrie took a deep breath. She knew it was crazy to say what she was about to say to a Nazi officer, but it was the truth, and he'd asked for it. "You and I are human, and we look on the outside of a person, but God looks at a person's heart. He knows where there is light or darkness inside the person, and that is what is important to him." Lieutenant Roms did not say anything, so Corrie went on. "Some people have great darkness in their hearts. Are you one of those people, Lieutenant?" "Today's session is over," he replied coldly as he got up from his chair and flung the door open. "Guard!" he yelled. "Take this prisoner back to her cell." And that's where we stop.